I can't believe I actually have to say this, but then again, I actually can believe I have to say this. No, The Lord of the Rings is not Christian fiction. Oh, I know. There are going to be some hurt feelings over this one. Two years ago, I made a video challenging some dude who claimed that Christianity had nothing to do with any of J.R.R. Tolkien's works. And now I have to do the opposite because for some reason, many people on the Christian right have convinced themselves that The Lord of the Rings is Christian fiction. No, it is not. And yes, I'm aware of Letter 142. I'll get to that. The Lord of the Rings does have Christian themes throughout the work, and Tolkien is on record saying that he was inspired by his faith. However, the idea that his work is Christian fiction means that it is about Christianity, and that is not what The Lord of the Rings or any of Tolkien's works are about. Tolkien tells us in the opening for The Lord of the Rings that his story is not an allegory, so the idea that any of the characters or events are meant to be one-for-one trade-offs for any Christian stories simply isn't true. But there are a lot of people on the Christian right who really seem to think that it is true. They've glommed onto Tolkien as if his works were meant to affirm their faith and worldview. I'm sure there have always been people like this, but now it's much more pronounced, especially on social media. I thought I was the only one who noticed this, but European Lore also mentioned it, and he recently posted a video about the reaction he got to calling the Christian right out for claiming Tolkien's works are Christian fiction. I'll link to his video in the description. I saw some of the comments on his video and started to respond to one of them, but it got long, so I decided to turn it into a video instead. The person in question wrote, quote, Tolkien described The Lord of the Rings as rich in Christian symbolism. As he explained in a letter to his close friend and Jesuit priest Robert Murray, The Lord of the Rings is of course a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. Yes, Tolkien did say in a 1953 letter, Letter 142, to Father Robert Murray that the work was, quote, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. However, in 1955, Tolkien wrote to his American publishers Houghton Mifflin Company, Letter 165, quote, I think a primary fact about my work that it is all of a piece and fundamentally linguistic in inspiration. He later states in that letter, quote, certainly it has no allegorical intentions, general, particular, or topical, moral, religious, or political. He then goes on to say, quote, I am in any case myself a Christian, but the Third Age was not a Christian world. In 1965, he responded to H.W. Auden, letter 269, about whether the orcs being irredeemably wicked was heretical. Tolkien sidesteps the heresy claim and says, quote, I don't feel under any obligation to make my story fit with formalized Christian theology, though I actually intended it to be consonant with Christian thought and belief. Tolkien never said his works were rich in Christian symbolism. He says in letter 142, quote, for the religious element is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. However, that is very clumsily put and sounds more self-important than I feel. Professor Tolkien was very precious about words, so please, do not put words into his mouth. Even a cursory glance of his works would show that there's plenty referencing non-Christian myths and legends. You've got references to Norse Eddas, Greek mythology, English folktales, and a smattering of Celtic legends, both the legit stuff and what people think of as Celtic. Some of those elements can be interpreted as Christian-inspired, but many of them appear in other religions and myths. Most of the Christian elements come in the form of themes, like the fall of the elves, or concepts like the power of words. The fairest takeaway is that Tolkien's faith may have inspired the type of stories he told, but he literally tells us several times that he went out of his way not to tie his secondary world to the real world, either through events or religion, and that latter one is important because it was one of his biggest problems with C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia books. Tolkien didn't like how Lewis tried to smuggle in Christianity, as Tolkien called it, into his stories. Tolkien had no problem with Aslan being a Christ-like figure, but he didn't like the idea of Aslan literally being Christ, because that would tie Narnia to our world instead of letting it develop its own mythos, gods, legends, and lore. The weird part about the Christian right's obsession over Tolkien is that C.S. Lewis literally did what they want. Lewis is far more overt in his use of Christianity in his books, to the point that he felt the need to respond to the assumption that he set out to convert children. Quote, some people seem to think that I began by asking myself, how could I say something about Christianity to children, then fixed on the fairy tale as an instrument, then collected information about child psychology, and decided what age group I'd write for, then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out allegories to embody them. This is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write in that way. It all began with images, a fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first, there wasn't anything Christian about them. That element pushed itself in on its own accord. That said, the Christian elements in the Chronicles of Narnia are painfully obvious. So why would the Christian right attach themselves to the Lord of the Rings instead of just sticking with Narnia? It's simple. The Lord of the Rings is more popular. It's more well-known and beloved. It spawned more copycats, inspired more works, and despite what some of the Christian right claim, it's not so obviously Christian, meaning the Lord of the Rings has broader global appeal. With the current obsession over identity politics, it's not a surprise that people on the right, especially the Christian right, will look for something in entertainment that represents their views. But it's not enough just to find that one franchise or story. It needs to be popular, beloved, something everyone knows, because then it can be used to validate the right's opinions, their identity, and then try to take it away from anyone who's not part of their group. I've seen this in comments on my videos, with people saying things like, "You can't really like or understand Tolkien's works if you're not Christian." Eventually, I did respond to one of them and said, "I'm an atheist. Do you think I don't like Tolkien's works? That I'm faking it? That I don't understand any of the half-dozen books I've read for over 2 decades? I mean, one of us has translated Audioslave's Shadow on the Sun into Quenya, and the other one is you." I didn't say that part, but I'm just letting y'all know I did do that. I also translated it into 2 of my own conlangs. That was harder than I thought it would be, because there are many idioms and euphemisms in that song that I had to create versions of for both languages that made sense in those cultures to make it work. Oh, when I nerd out, I fully commit. Anyway, I do wonder how Tolkien would respond to someone trying to use his works to smuggle Christianity into popular fiction. Judging by how he wrote his letters, I don't think it would be a pleasant response, although it would be very polite. If you want to know how precious Tolkien was about these things, at the beginning of letter 165, Tolkien spends half a paragraph correcting the misspelling of his name. They wrote Tolkien instead of Tolkien, and then giving the etymology of the name Tolkien. So I don't think Tolkien would appreciate people misrepresenting his works or his intentions. Obviously, his religious views affected the works he wrote, but not to the degree that the works were inextricably Christian in presentation. They are not. They do have Christian themes, some of which could also tie in with Western European mythology and folklore, but his stories are not about being Christian, convincing anyone into becoming Christian, or validating Christian ideas. As Tolkien said, he wrote his works to be consonant with, in agreement with Christian thought and belief, not to be a one-for-one trade-off. If that's what you're looking for, then you should read The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. That's a series about affirming Christianity, at least to a degree. The Lord of the Rings, and most of Tolkien's works, is doing something much more sophisticated, addressing the themes and concepts at the core of so many Western legends and myths. He shows how those things might come about, why they're so important, and the power they have in our culture. That he essentially did it by accident, because all he was really concerned with was having people who would speak his languages, is a testament to the man's skill as a world builder and a storyteller. In the opening of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien tells us that he prefers applicability over allegory because, quote, "the one resides in the freedom of the reader and the other in the purpose domination of the author." Tolkien invites people to apply whatever they want to his stories, but that is not an invitation for anyone to express purpose domination over others by forcing people to conform to their applied ideas. Tolkien did not write Christian fiction. The Christian right is free to view his works through a Christian lens, if that's what they want to do. They are not free to claim that this was Tolkien's intention, or demand that others believe the same thing. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.